My name is Jana Leontieva. I work at the Institute of Sociology at the Academy of Science, the guesting institution of this, one of the guesting institutions for this event. And I was asked by my colleagues to introduce our speakers for the first afternoon session. First, we'll have a pleasure to listen to Dr. Stefan Rother, who is a political scientist. He's a researcher and lecturer at the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Freiburg, Germany. And his research is focused on international migration, global governance, social movements, regional integration, and non-post-Western theories of international relations. Dr. Rother was an editorial manager of the International Quarterly for Asian Studies, and he was a senior researcher at the Arnold Bergstrater, I'm sorry for the pronunciation of Institute for Social Cultural Research.
ADI.
ADI, exactly, for social cultural research at the University of Freiburg. At ABA, he was also a part of the research project called Democratization through Migration, Political Attitudes of Philippine Return Migrants, and he co-authored a book which has the same name. He authored numbers of publications. Today he is a board member of Journal Association for Asian Studies and a speaker of the working group on migration in the German Political Science Association. Interesting fact is also that Stefan Rother is a trained journalist, and he actually has more than 20 years of experience as an editor and a freelance writer for several daily and weekly newspapers. So Dr. Rother will present a paper today called Tokens or Stakeholders in Global Migration Governance, the Role of Civil Society in the Global Compacts on Migration and Refugees. And his discussant today, who will try to react on the presentation by Dr. Rother, will be Magda Faltová. She's a director of the Association for Integration and Migration, short CIMI, which is the NGO in Czech Republic. This organization, CIMI, provides free legal, social and psychological counseling to migrants and also promotes tolerance and fight xenophobia and racism. Magda holds a law degree, and apart from leading CIMI and providing legal counseling to migrants, she authored several publications and expert papers on migration policies and practices, including, for example, MIPEX studies. She's also a member of the boards in several networks like International Consortium on Migrants Assisting Organization, La Strada, Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants, PICUM, as I learned that she will be giving representing this organization a lot in her reaction, and also a Pro Bono Alliance, which is an organization with a primary goal to make the legal instrument in the Czech Republic more effective in protecting human rights, public interest, and important common values. And Magda is also currently the head of the Committee for the Rights of Foreigners at the Government Council for Human Rights. So please, Dr. Stefan, the floor is yours. I think that you have like approximately half an hour. I'll try to...
Okay. Please remind me otherwise.
Okay.
Well, thanks everybody for being here. I mean, the first talk after lunch is always a bit of a challenge because personally I tend to kind of slumber a little bit off. So I do my best to keep you awake in the next half hour. And thanks for the very comprehensive introduction. The newspaper part is actually quite interesting. I might come back to that because the Global Compact made me kind of divide my loyalties between my newspaper past and my research present, because it was very hard to distinguish between the media debate on a topic and the academic debate. But I'm coming back on that, and I'm looking very much forward to have the comments. I will mention PICUM, by the way. So, I mean, as you notice, Karl is a very modest person, right? He said he's an amateur, but it was such a deep-rooted analytical presentation he made. So let's see how much is left for me to still add to this one. But I think the groundwork has been laid fantastically about the issues of global migration governance. And maybe, I'm not playing devil's advocate, but of course, for the sake of debate, I'm trying to present maybe some different perspectives. Because the Global Compact has a little bit of a bad reputation, maybe to some regard, and I would say it is certainly a step back in some regards. It is a step back from legally binding conventions and other processes we're having. but it is also a step forward in some regard, and that is because the whole debate has stepped so much back that it fell behind the compact, right? I mean, that's something we always have to keep in the back of our mind. Of course, the compact, there's so much to complain about it, but the reality we are facing out there the whole time, the narratives on migration we are dealing with, I would say if the recommendations from the compact would be followed, it might not be a better world, but a little bit less terrible world, actually, to some degree, right? I mean, that is a bit the very frustrating benchmark we are coming from. We're having big backlash against migrant rights, against governance. So that's why I have a little bit more optimistic outlook that it makes a very small step forward in comparison. So the Global Compact, I don't have to tell anybody of you, it's a contested issue. That's a way of branding that might be a bit misinterpreted, because when we went to Morocco the last year, even the garbage cans had this nice logo from the Global Compact for Migration. And as you know, several politicians in Europe and abroad would have liked to put the whole compact into the garbage can. So from a wider topic speaking, I would say, and I'm not going to be overly dramatic, but the debate, and we had to talk about this yesterday also, the debate on the compact we have been witnessing marks one of the major challenges of democracy we are facing at the moment. Because the compact is so important? No. But the way we see that social media, bots, orchestrated campaigns can try to influence democratic processes of deliberation, can spread, I don't want to say fake news, can spread misinformation, and can try to hijack topics, because that's something we came up with yesterday. Actually, it was just a convenient topic to hijack by the right-wing movement in Europe and beyond, right? Nobody, I mean, as Carl said so nicely, I've been researching this for quite a long time, and normally you should be happy if after so many years somebody finally cares about this, but I could have done without their attention in a certain way. Right? And that's where my loyalties came into question, because when the German media asked me then many times to comment on a compact, I ended up defending it, while in academic circles I'm criticizing it. And that's something you are facing maybe as well, right? The whole migration and development debate I see very critical, and we wrote very critical articles on it. But if you talk to a newspaper or to a wider audience, that is too much dialectics, maybe. It's possibly a good step, but we have to make it like this, right? I mean, it is a positive narrative of migration. That's what I think is positive about the migration and development debate. So what am I going to talk about? Some more principal issues, and that's maybe something that could be added or criticized even from this presentation. I'm talking a lot about structure. Who is sitting where, who is doing what, and that's a bit of a danger I'm facing as a researcher, but it's also a bit of a danger civil society is facing. We get so caught up in a process, oh, I wrote section number 5b of this paper, and it's very important, but the measurement in the end is always what difference does it make for the people on the ground, for the affected communities, right? But I'm going one step back and I'm saying, why is it important that migrant civil society should be involved in global migration governance? I talk about the Global Compact migration deliberations. I'm talking a little bit about the monitoring, and then I'm adding something on the Global Compact on refugees. So migrant civil society, Carl has mentioned it already, and I'm jealous of the nice graphic he's made of the inside-outside perspective. Yeah, so maybe I can borrow it from him. But here, that's a picture that was taken in Marrakesh 10 months from now, the end of the Global Forum on Migration Development, shortly before the agreement on a Global Compact for Migration. So we are seeing one big migrant family here, or that's how it seems, but of course it's a very contested issue within migrant civil society as well. Because as this older picture might tell you, there are also migrant organizations that are fundamentally critical of all these global processes. They are saying no to forced migration, no to labor export. They are against the GFMD. They say it's a commodification. So they are asking some of the more fundamental questions. So you're all aware of that, but of course, if we talk about civil society, we have to use plural, because there is not one civil society. It's a very heterogeneous, divided, sometimes even hostile group within each other. And why should it not be, of course? You're nodding very knowingly, right, about this. But very often you hear, why don't the migrants speak with one voice? We have to present a unified voice. Would be nice, but on the other hand, would it be nice? Why should they, right? I mean, just because everybody is a migrant doesn't mean they have the same interests, right? They come from very different backgrounds, very different political attitudes. So I would say it's an aspect of democracy, of pluralism, that we have many conflicting interests. It's very messy, as democracy is, obviously, but it's not a bad thing per se, even if it might weaken your negotiation position against governments and others. But why should civil society participate? And here's a quote from last year in December, Kevin Appleby, actually quite ambitious quote. At the end of the Civil Society Days, he said, "The people in this room and our colleagues around the globe are the ones who are going to make or break this compact. The UN migration system will be there to help, hopefully, but they won't be able to hold the governments accountable, because that's not how the UN works to a certain degree. We are the only ones that can do that." So that's a bit of a burden, I would say, on the shoulders of migrant activists, but that shows a bit kind of the ambition and the burden that is behind this. But to go a bit on a more theoretical level, why should civil society be a part of global governance? And I'm situating this in a wider research topic on democratizing global governance, on democratizing global institutions. Democratizing is a very big word. I'm having a fairly low threshold. It means we need more participation by affected communities. So there is the all affected principle. I wrote the quote here. And as every principle, it's very easy to say, very hard to achieve, but it says everyone who is affected by a decision of government has a right to participate in the government. Now we all know that does not work already, maybe on a local level, to some degrees, not on a state level, but it's something to strive for, and it's something, it's not an absolute measure, right? It's something that can be increased. Everybody should be involved to some point, meaning if there is politics on migrants and refugees, wouldn't it make sense to involve them in this process? Doesn't sound so revolutionary, but if you talk to states or media about this, they consider it quite scandalous to a certain degree, right? If I say that in Germany, they are saying the refugees are coming here, now they should decide what is being done with them. I mean, they should be grateful. So they're not really subjects of policy, they are objects, right? They're treated like objects and they don't have the agency in this view of the world. And the counter-narrative to this is nothing about us without us. That has been heard in many social movements, meaning if you're dealing with policies on us, it would only make sense to include this, right? And as I said, this would lead to the democratization of international institutions to a small degree. That's why it's called tokens or meaningful participation. And now, I mean, there's sociologists here, so that's a contested topic also. There's a big debate about governance versus management, right? Some say it's semantics. I would say it makes a big difference because management is a buzzword, very popular. Carl talked about it with politicians. Management means, yes, that is a technocratic problem. And if we only have the right policies and if we only have the right data, then we can really address this problem. But migration is not something to be solved, right? That's something the German public had to learn, right? People ask, so refugee crisis, when is it over? 4 years or how long will it take? And then you have to say, sorry, it's a lifetime project. It's about people, it's about life cycles. And that's something maybe they're not so used to in Germany, that it's a bit messy and it cannot be solved in this measure. But of course, the same can be said about migrants and refugees topics. So the approach we are talking about here is a rights-based approach. And the functions, and that's something like textbook, of course, here, but what can civil society do? They can act as watchdogs, they can act as a transmission belt, and by that I mean they can communicate what is happening in New York back to the constituency, but it should work both ways, right? Because they have the knowledge and the expertise, what is happening on the ground, and ideally they can bring this expertise up to the regional level, up to the global level. Of course, it's a matter of resources. And Geneva, as being one of the headquarters, is a particularly difficult place to participate. We talk about this. It's one of the most expensive cities to go to. It's very hard to get a visum to go there. So there's many practical issues to become involved. But if you have a representation on a higher level, at least PICUM and other organizations could try to represent you. Then we already heard about inside-outside strategies, and I'm very thankful to Carl for bringing this concept of invited, invented spaces to the topic. But as we all know, and you would agree on that, of course, we cannot glorify civil society. It's also a very messy, heterogeneous group. And the biggest question is, what is the legitimacy of civil society? right? Because if you look at the internal structure of many organizations, it is not as transparent. And you wonder, doing research for 10, 12 years, it's always the same people you talk to, which is an advantage to a certain degree, right? You have your networks, you can talk to them, but you wonder, right? Isn't that a sort of professionalization? Which has some advantage. They know about it, they can work on it. The disadvantage is, of course, it's a tough job, of course, but if you're in a developing country, and I'm saying that maybe a bit controversial, it is also not the worst job in the world to have, right? It's more well paid than other jobs, you can travel a lot, so it's something you're very passionate about the topic, but it's kind of an attractive option, so it's not something you would take easily, you would like to stay. Like every institution wants to stay to a certain degree, also you want to stay maybe with this NGO you're working with. So internal democracy is something that can be improved, to say the very least. If you talk about World Social Forums or migration and others, I asked them, how is your board actually being constituted? I'm being aware I'm recorded here, but they say, yeah, somebody invited his friends and sort of, it's really not a very transparent process. And this is a very grassroots movement. So that is not used to delegitimize civil society, but that is something where they have to be actively being more transparent about this. And the other problem, of course, is funding, right? Because one of the most popular sessions in the GFMD once was, where is the money, right? Obviously, that's where all the NGOs participated, because that's what you need to keep it going. But the problem is, of course, we have the MacArthur Foundation, for example, a 5-year program on global migration governance. Very good work has been done. Then after 5 years, it's almost like communist planning in a way, they have a different program. Now we focus on another topic. But the migrant topic is still there, right? But now all the nice initiatives that have been started don't have funding anymore. So I've seen many good processes being stopped because the funding went out. NGOs didn't exist anymore. So we don't have the continuity of funding in this regard. And the other aspect is, of course, donor-driven NGOs, meaning, are you following your own politics, or are you seeing a call? A big global organization says, we have this program, of course you have to fulfill certain criteria, right? That's a buzzword. Gender check, multi-stakeholder check, etc. So the danger we are facing here is that you're doing it more for the donors than for your constituency. There might be a better program than this, but to get the money, you have to compromise. Obviously, that's something you have to do in life, but it's also, it doesn't make your work much easier, quite the opposite. So all that we should keep in mind. But if we look at the way the Global Compact was deliberated upon, I would claim actually it was quite effective from the perspective of civil society, because it was a very well-oiled machine. And if you listen to Karl's presentation, you can see this long development over 10 years where many networks and umbrella organizations have been set up. So when in the New York Declaration they said, we're going to do a Global Compact, people didn't have to look for partners. They could say, okay, we're meeting here in New York, we're doing this, we're having an outreach, we have a webinar, we're going like this about this. So very quickly, they have set up a civil society action committee. These are the participants, the umbrella organizations. It started off with 30 plus members, and then it became kind of more consistent. It was first geared only to the New York Declaration, and now it's more like an ongoing global network dealing with the Global Compact. Then IOM is let's say, a contested partner for many civil society organizations. There's some critique coming there, there's some partnerships going on. But what IOM did in support in this regard was they facilitated a liaison officer, and that was a very well-known migrant activist, Colin Raja, who has been with the other NGOs. Now we can have the talk. Some people say he got co-opted by getting this position. Others would say, very good that he got the position. He knows most about the topic, right? So that's something, co-optation, participation, that's a fine borderline. But in this regard, I think they made a very good choice. But then from the civil society side, and that's based on interviews I conducted with them, there's always a topic. They were very happy about IOM support, coming to New York, giving them space. But then they said, we still want to be autonomous from IOM because we have some issues with the operational side. On global governance, we find common ground with IOM, but on the ground, many of our organizations are not completely happy with what IOM is doing in some regards. So here are some quotes I said, because when I got the first draft of the Global Compact, the zero draft, right? Zero draft is even before the first draft. I was quite impressed because I was hearing the voice of civil society quite loud and clear by reading this Global Compact. Yeah? I mean, of course, after all the years, you know, the phrasing, the buzzwords, but I think it was some meaningful civil society input. And as somebody said here in the interview, some parts of PCOM's report, they were almost cut, copy and pasted, something we should not do, and you see this, but it's okay for this regard, I would say, to the Global Compact draft. For example, for undocumented migrants. And then they're also trying to have partners looking for friendly member states or affiliate member states, right? Because that is something that cannot be achieved against the states, as critical as we might be about states' policies, but without states you cannot get anything done. So you might look for like-minded states that are supporting your cause, and then you have also somebody inside the state process who might bring forward your own part. But what this person criticized is civil society missed the boat with regards to implementation. There was not enough organization. So that is what is happening right now. And if I wouldn't be sitting here with you, there's a webinar going on right now about the UN Migration Network, where civil society is educating its member base how to engage with this new process with the UN. And what is also going on at the moment here, develop a new model for future civil society engagement, still a bit in the making. They want to institutionalize this engagement with the Global Compact. And here I'm a bit outdated because yesterday I got the email, the GFMD in Quito is postponed, so it's not going to take place next month. God knows when it's going to take place. They say December, I doubt it, to a degree. And here's the link to the website if you're interested in this aspect. So what about the monitoring and implementation? So it's kind of a mixed bag. As you know, the Global Compact has a 360-degree vision, something I made fun of initially, but what it means is everything related is everything in there in the kitchen sink way, right? You can make fun of it. On the other hand, they try to have a comprehensive approach and make more a list of what is relevant in the terms of migration. And it's something we talked about yesterday as well. The better term actually would not have been to call it a compact, because it confused people very much. In Germany it was translated to pact. A pact sounds very binding. In Latin you say pactus sunt servandi, so that's how it is from this beginning. What we are looking here actually are the global migration goals. That is something to achieve, that is something to strive for. It's not binding, and the compact is overselling it, and it's confusing people, but of course that ship has been sailed. But the way it's done, it's a bit like the SDGs. And the important part about the SDGs is, of course, the monitoring and the implementation. But in this regard, of course, the SDGs are much more advanced. It's a very complicated process, being more of a qualitative guy, some mixed method. I find it a bit hard to follow, but they have 100 indicators trying to narrow it down, but at least that is something to measure the implementation. In terms of the Global Compact, not so much at this point. We have the International Migration Review. Now it gets confusing. Quite a good journal, of course, but what I'm talking about here is a new process that meets every 4 years to monitor the implementation. And many people say we have to wait 4 years to really monitor this process. Why don't we get going now? But that's how it is in 2022. Will be the next and first meeting. And then they said it's very important to have all stakeholders participate, and it's very important to have the regional level involved. But for the regional level, they picked up the economic commissions of the UN. Something I must admit I was not so familiar until this point. And I wonder if it's really the best place. I mean, there's many other regional processes already going on, but that's something to wait and see how this will work out. We have the UN Network on Migration. That's what the webinar is about today. If you remember before that, it was the GMG, Global Migration Group, and if some of you remember Peter Sutherland, who has gone from us unfortunately, that's something he always criticized very strongly in every meeting I went to, because that did not work at all. We have almost up to 50 organizations globally that are dealing with migration. Not all of them are in the GMG, but the cooperation in this group did just not work. So now they rebooted it last year in Marrakesh and had a reception. But it will be interesting to go to Geneva in December, how the UN Network on Migration will be a better framework for cooperation. Because as we all know, there are certain turf wars going on, right? We have quite a few agencies dealing with migration, and everybody, of course, wants to stake their claims and their participation in this process. we have the aforementioned civil society liaison officer that just got now announced that Monami Malik, a long-time colleague of us, is the new liaison officer, and she has been involved for 15-20 years with migrant organizing, so a very good choice, of course, to keep the connection to civil society. And then the GFMD, we heard quite a lot about it. The advantage is it's a very well-established, formalized engagement, but it's a bit of an empty vessel that you can fill with new topics. And after the Global Compact, some people were worried, and some people would have been happy. Do we need the GFMD actually? So it had to reinvent itself in a way, and it might be a good tool to meet every year and talk about the Global Compact and related processes, because the review forum is only every 4 years. So that's possible monitoring. So make a very short assessment. I would say the strength of civil society in principle is the multi-level approach, right? We have these organizations that are based in New York, that are based in Geneva, and they have a very strong regional membership. And interestingly, and that's something I disagree maybe with the last session, I don't see it as so Western dominated. Actually, from my field of research, it's actually mostly Filipino dominated or Southeast Asian dominated, right? I mean, it's very uneven, the membership. Southeast Asia is a very well organized region in terms of migration. Latin America is well organized. In Europe, it's much harder. I mean, I think PICUM is a Europe-wide network, but all the other platforms in Europe are really struggling to bring migrant organizations together all over Europe. In comparison, and what I always notice going to all these processes, Eastern Europe, unfortunately, was always surprised, pleasantly surprised, of course, if I met somebody from Eastern Europe, but it's hardly there, right? State-wise, civil society-wise, meet somebody from Bulgaria, from Russia, but I think it makes you wonder, right? It's a huge topic. I mean, you know much more about this than me, but this global dimension somehow is not as prevalent in comparison. And of course, I think the regional level might be very helpful, like as a meso-intermediate level. And I also think it's important to maintain invented spaces. And here are some recommendations on a German example. Maybe I cut this short for time reasons. But for us, the Global Compact, for us people, academia, civil society in Germany being active, it is also a tool because we're trying to pressure the government to make a national action plan on compact implementation. And that is a bit of a textbook example how migration policies work. We had a workshop with the German Bishops' Conference where I could speak and all the ministries were invited. So we had the development ministry saying, very important to have this implementation plan. We have the foreign ministry saying, well, very diplomatic, quite interested. And then we have the Ministry of Interior saying, yeah, we're doing this already. Germany is the best in this regard, but it's very good if the other countries finally live up to German standards. Right? So that's a kind of perspective. And they say, oh, it would be good to have it binding, then less migrants would come. Right? So then that's our advocacy strategy saying, actually, a lot of stuff in the compact is not being done in Germany. Family reunification, rights of undocumented migrants, exactly the points that make Germany not ratify the Migrant Worker Convention. Right? So that's a big question for advocacy. Should we give up on the Migrant Worker Convention? I would say no, actually, right? You can do both. But here, they are not following up on this. And then as in every country, there's not really a formalized mode of civil society engagement in Germany. But how should it look like? Does it have to be state-sponsored? Would bring in the resources, but has some problems of cooptation again, right? But I think that since migrants really have limited resources and refugees even more, there needs to be some established space for participation. So now I made it look like civil society was very unified, of course, but just a few pictures to show the diversity. So you heard about this. So if I'm doing research at the GFMD, I should be at 5 places at once, ideally. So in the evening before the GFMD, we had this demonstration outside the Brandenburg Gate. The next morning I returned to have the counter demonstration at the Brandenburg Gate, right? So that's how civil society works. That is kind of the more radical anti-GFMD groups demonstrating back then in Berlin. And then, of course, we have a variety. Karl mentioned some of them. We have like the People's Global Action that is affiliated. But then you have to learn many acronyms if you do migration and civil society studies. We have the International Migrants Alliance. And that is kind of a veto player or counter player to some regard. Because if you look here, it was founded in Hong Kong, interestingly enough. And the premise behind is for a long time, others have spoken on our behalf. Now we speak for ourselves. So they are saying we are the first global grassroots organization of migrants. and they're using the term NGO as a negative term, right? So it's also a political strategy in a way. There's a book about NGOization, meaning that NGO is in a way a bad thing, right? You can use it as a bad term, meaning it's funded by Western donors, it is professionalized in a certain way, and it's people working for migrants, but not being migrants themselves. So here they say, we are the migrants speaking on our behalf. And they've also been active in the process, but maybe in a different manner, but speaking at the UN General Assembly and other events. And then there are smaller groups that are also relevant. I mean, that's what I wrote about in Karl's book, actually. The CWWM, next acronym, that's a faith-based organization, more Protestant churches, very progressive agenda in a way. Will it change the whole process? Maybe not, but for me it's very important to participate because they have many testimonies. Yeah? They invite people from the migrant caravan in Mexico, domestic workers, marriage migrants, who tell their story, and it's a way to give voice to migrant groups. Now, very briefly, to come to an end here, but it's something that is maybe been less prominent in a debate, and I have to give full credit. That's an article where my co-author mostly focused on the Global Compact for Refugees. Right? Because the Global Compact for Refugees, as I understand it, was not necessarily meant to be a Global Compact for Refugees. Because they already had a document in 2016 in New York, but since the migrants got their compact, I'm joking a little bit, they said like, okay, then we have to do our own as well, right? The states would have been happy to actually decide upon this there, but then it was kind of linked in saying we have to do both. So then we have the well-oiled machine of civil society and a fairly consultative, transparent process, I would say. We have the Global Compact for Migration. The Refugee Compact was really sidelined. And it's really bizarre. The public debate we had about the Global Compact for Migration was actually talking about issues from the Global Compact for Refugees in a way, right? That's how you see people are mixing up migrants and refugees. And also, to play a bit devil's advocate, I'm not completely opposed to make a distinction between migrants and refugees. My criticism here is you should see the nexus and you should discuss it together. But my fear is if you would say we should treat migrants and refugees the same, we have this level of protection, we have this level of protection, will this one go up? Of course not. This one will go down, right? So we have a mandate, as outdated it might be, but I think refugees still form a different category in terms of status. And it would be good, of course, if they have labor rights, etc. But that's open to debate. I'm looking forward what you are saying, right? So then that's why we have like two documents. We have the response framework, we have a program of action, etc. And the big difference is migration governance, fairly new topic. Refugee governance, it's a codified refugee regime with a very clear institution, right? We don't have the equivalent to UNHCR in terms of migration. And from the observations of my colleague, he's saying it's less confrontative, it's more of a consensual and very geographically concentrated place. Everything takes place in Geneva, right? So there are over 600 mainly large and professional NGOs in Geneva, and it's kind of, everybody knows each other from what I understand it, so it's kind of tested and tried and tested, right? But the presence and input of refugees themselves in UNHCR has been criticized as being not enough and being rather tokenistic to this degree. So when the Global Compact for Refugees was being negotiated, many people expected business as usual. But what happened is that a new actor came to the stage, the Network for Refugee Voices, and that is a mostly Syrian-based group of refugees. Now they're part of different name, Global Refugee Network, but that was kind of, well, not the joker, but a kind of the wild card or whatever you call it. People were not very much aware of this, but they entered the stage, and from my observations of my colleague, they were quite quite articulated in the presentations there. So one interview we did with them, they said, we formed this network to remind the world community that refugees have agency. Our contribution is key to developing solutions that are effective and sustainable. And that's why we call on you to commit to the UN General Assembly Declaration that all states, all refugee policy must contain direct refugee input. So that's the good thing about the New York Declaration. It gives a voice to refugees, right? It's only on paper, but at least you can use this paper, go to this forum and say refugees should have a say in this regard. And from what I hear, they've been very vocal, but of course, now we come to the problem of legitimacy presentation. It's a limited membership. It was mostly Syrian refugees. As we all know, refugees is a very complex group, of course, so representation is a bit an issue. But what happened next, several global events on refugees were organized, one facilitated by Oxfam, the International Refugee Congress, and the Global Summit of Refugees as well. And since we both, my colleague Elias and me, followed both compacts from the zero draft to the end draft, we had different tendencies. Because the zero draft I found rather advanced of the Global Compact for Migration, so our colleague said it can only go downhill from here. And that's not wrong, of course, because that's where all the civil society and all the nice points were written down. Then you talk with states and negotiate, and then it goes a bit down. But I still think some important stuff was saved in this compact. On the other hand, my colleague claims that the zero draft on refugees was so unambitious in the beginning that there was some room for improvement. So at least these voices had some influence of bringing refugee participation more to the core. So what is happening next from here? The Global Refugee Forum, the Global Refugee Forum will take place. Also taking place every 4 years. Here they made the right choice to start right away. So mid of December in Geneva we have the first refugee forum taking 3 days before Christmas. And what will happen, we have 1 day before the forum where you have spotlight sessions and there's a lot of talk. Everything here is about good practices, best practices. And that is also a very contested term, right? From a very technocratic, policy-oriented perspective, good practices are good, but they're also depoliticizing them now, of course. If you talk about good practices, you're not talking about root causes of migration and refugees. But now the counter-argument, is it a reason not to talk about good practices? I would say no, right? Because it's at least, if a policy works, for all stakeholders involved, for migrants, for refugees, it's a good idea if other states can learn from it. Very pragmatic approach, but that is kind of the big theme on the spotlight sessions. Marketplace, which I find a very problematic term. At the first GFMD, they had a marketplace for migrants. So now we're talking about commodification of labor. Don't call it like this, I would say, a marketplace. But here it's a marketplace of good practices. And the speaker's corner, and if you can read the small print, how do they define good practices? They can address a specific situation, a specific group, and they have the potential to be adapted, replicated, or broadened in scale, opportunities to maximize the effective and efficient use of resources. So again, a bit buzzwordy in a way, but let's see what happens, right? I try to participate in this one, and it will be interesting to see if something comes out. There is a platform for partnerships for the GFMD, but most of the good practices there is something that has been going on. So it looks good on paper, like 1,000 examples, but I didn't see many cases of diffusion of these practices. So that is a forum coming up. Here we have it again. And then we have the Global Forum for Refugees proper taking place. And that's where we have a plenary on burden and responsibility sharing. That's a wording you can debate in a way, right? So refugees are a burden in this case. And then a plenary on comprehensive responses. And there has been a commitment beforehand on key topics, and some of these key topics are protection capacity, jobs and livelihoods, education, inclusive societies. So that's how the debate will be framed at the upcoming Refugee Forum. And I'm coming to an end here now, some propaganda at the end. So this morning, the good news is the article finally came out. That's one I really waited for a long time. They had like a data hack breach, they told me. That's why they couldn't publish it. But if you're interested, that's the article, and full credit to my colleague Elias, who did the refugee part. And I'm very happy on contact in all sorts of social media where I'm active. So thanks very much. Very looking forward to your...
Well, thank you for your very interesting talk. I think that I can really add some experience from the other side of NGO, partly as a member of the board of PICUM. We discussed a lot on the role of PICUM in the whole project and of Global Compacts, but as well, what's the role or what's the aim of the global advocacy and how to actually get input from members and bring the results or the situation back to the members, and how this type of network should work with that. And as well on the national level, I do a lot of advocacy in terms of what the Czech government does, which or doesn't. It depends, concerning human rights of migrants and refugees. And of course, the discussion is very similar, how to legitimize what we are doing, how to bring the voice of migrants in what we do. However, in both situations, we are working in very technical space, where you need a lot of experience, knowledge, resources and capacity to actually be heard, or at least feel that you have some impact. I think that, I don't know how other networks, but PICUM is very aware that the impact is limited, that we didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to have very strong documents on especially as the mission of PICUM is protection of rights of undocumented migrants. So we wanted to see much stronger, at least wording, if not action, on the in terms of the protection part and the rights of migrants as such, but specifically undocumented, which is not there. We can see it, and I think that we have very similar experience in terms of. We were trying to advocate in the Czech Republic as well for joining Global Compact on Migration, and then you are on TV saying that the document is actually quite good and that we should sign it, and then you know that it's not what I would like to see there, but you always, I think, have to measure or see if there is what's the impact, and sometimes you get it wrong as well. I think that that's another huge issue if we are talking about the capacity and legitimacy of the organizations, is that we don't really have any or huge preparatory time to do things or to do the advocacy campaign or to get engaged with the Global Compact. Yes, we knew that something is happening, but you don't really prepare structural, plan how to get into, how to really get the alliances, which states you contact, and how you do it. It's very reactive way mainly, because the situation is changing so quickly that you don't really. I think that you cannot really have proper strategy as such. And then, when it finishes, we don't have time to evaluate and see and measure the impact, because there are other things going on, like after the Global Compact finished, then we have new commission, and now we are trying to push the agenda through and focusing much more on the European level to channel things there. So we are not saying that we are leaving the global arena, but there are some other priorities, and I think this whole thing is just the problem that we don't have or we have limited capacity to engage with migrants and to empower migrants-led organization. Even though I think that PICUM is quite good in that we do have members who are very small organization, only volunteers. Quite a lot of migrant-led organizations, and as well we have members like La Strada International or Caritas, who are huge professional organizations, and we are trying to balance it. We are trying to balance it in the board as well, but this is the ongoing discussion how to do it efficiently, and how to explain as well the members and constituency why the global level is important. And sometimes, even for us, it's a discussion if the global level is that important. And we don't know. I think that we will see as well what's going to happen with global compacts. So, and the very same situation is at the national level. We don't have capacity and maybe as well experience to properly evaluate what we do, and so we finish one commenting on the new proposal of the law of the foreigners, which was actually adopted in July, and today or yesterday we submitted a new comments for the new proposal that's already in the pipeline to government and again to go through the parliament. So there is no there are no I think measures in place from our side how to do it. Which is not saying that we shouldn't be doing it. And I think that a huge part of, and I think especially in our region, what I can see is that there are not many migrants in being activists or being on board with us. I think it's improving in the Czech Republic especially, but as well other Visegrad countries. But I personally think that it's a huge issue, but I don't. I think we are struggling to reach this situation within the organization. So I think that the organizations mainly know that there is a lack of democracy and transparency in some areas, but it's a lot of to ask. Actually, to change everything when you are running to global compacts and you want to deliver the protection of the human rights. And I fully understand, and I'm very happy that the civil society and the migrants are so diverse, and that we see people standing in front of Geneva or Marrakesh or wherever and claiming their rights and not actually and saying that they are not happy to with the development. I'm not happy as well, but I'm not activistic enough to be there, which is very sad. So and just to mention, actually with Marrakesh and Geneva, we had a representative from the Czech Republic, from civil society. Tomáš Jungwirth, policy officer, participated in both events. He was in Mexico as well. And it's the first time as well for a Czech umbrella organization to go to the global level, supported by PICUM. And I think it's important as well for us. Actually, in Marrakesh, he was the only Czech person. Nobody from the government came. So. It shows as well how important the global situation is for us. And just to add, not many things to the Global Compact on Refugees, but the Czech Republic surprisingly didn't didn't join the Global Compact for Migration, but did join the Global Compact for Refugees. Which is very interesting, since most of the legislators thought that the Global Compact on Migration is about refugees, which wasn't the case. So this is maybe the reason why we joined the other one concerning the refugees. You didn't tell them, right? Yeah, well, we try to tell them, but they don't listen much, so it's the problem. But we ran the campaign here to sign the compact as well, very unsuccessful. Another of our very unsuccessful campaigns, actually.
Okay, thank you, Magda and Stefan, very much. So now we have about we have about 20 minutes for questions and reactions from the auditorium. So please, if you do have. So just to begin, I have to admit that it was a little bit surprised that I have to moderate this session for me, so I'm not very well prepared, but still, as a migrant myself and someone who's been researching, one of my topic was the civic participation of migrants and like the motives and how the mechanism works, but in the Czech context. I'm just wondering, because at least in the Czech context, we found it difficult to find any organization which can be representative for migrants or for group of migrants for many reasons. Many older organizations are diaspora-based organizations, and they struggle even with certain images of this new migrants coming and them representing the political diaspora who's like more here for cultural events and something like this, not to fight for the rights of the new migrants. And then again, it was also it also had a lot to do with the mentality of migrants, with their lifestyle, with we know that a lot of them work hard and they lack not only time but also the will to not only to fight for their rights, but being active, being a member of several groups. And you mentioned that, for example, from Eastern Europe, it's hard to find any representatives from NGO, migrant representatives from NGO, being active on the forums like this. So I think that in a Czech context, we do have problems which start on the national level. So that's why, and you mentioned also professionalization of those organizations who have the capacities to speak on the global level. And migrants organizations, they're not even professional enough to compete with the Czech organization who try to solve that by having migrants in their boards as their members, as their social workers, as those who work on the project, so on and so forth. But I think, at least in the Czech context, is a problem with which on the national level starts on the national level. So just my reaction from what I heard from your presentation. So please, Susanna, you have first question, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if I may, to follow up with what you said. Well, thank you both for this presentation, and you definitely did very well to keep me awake after the lunch. And actually, I have two maybe. It's a question or a request for more elaboration. And because you mentioned this, that you're not that persuaded, you don't agree that this separation of migration, economic migration and refugee is that bad, but you then gave the pragmatic argument again. So maybe my question or request for elaboration would be, okay, that's the one thing to keep this pragmatic argument, but at the same time, isn't that also in a way counterproductive, because so many global assemblies and networking is happening, and Magda also mentioned that it's just time consuming and you struggle at different levels. So there's also this really a basic argument about time and human capacities. And even you said that you focus so much on migration compact, but not had enough time to do both. So actually, it's like a double agenda. People cannot do both, and then the whole issue is so fragmented that even though maybe legally, in terms of international law, we can still keep this separate. Don't you think that it would be helpful or fruitful in some way to merge this agenda, at least at this at the level of discussions? So that was my first thing, and then if I may have a second question, and it concerns this geopolitics of democracy deficit. So you said, okay, well, it's in your perspective, it's Asian oriented, and then you mentioned that maybe Central Europe is not that much visible. So how would you actually describe, this geopolitical situation at this civil society field, or however I should frame it?
Quite a lot already?
Yeah.
Maybe,
so just please.
Okay, maybe one clarification first. Of course, when I said that Eastern Europe is not present, it was not a criticism, it was a request. Right? So I would love to see it more, and I think it's an important topic, right? For both sides being involved. The same with the professionalization. I think I would make a distinction between organizations like PICUM, where I think you cannot do it the other way, and migrant self-organization. That also makes sense, but there it's a bit more of the case. If you claim to represent yourself, you should have very transparent internal democratic structures, right? Otherwise, PICUM's advocacy is so complex, you need people, lawyers, all kinds of backgrounds, right, to have the capacity to work in this. Then I thought your comment was excellent, because that's exactly a bit the problem of organizing. First of all, not every migrant has to be an activist, not every refugee has to be an activist, not every non-refugee is an activist, right? I mean, it's always a smaller percentage of people who are politically active, and you cannot force anybody. Same about migration development debate. Not every migrant is an entrepreneur, not every migrant has to start a business, right? So this whole top-down debate is kind of missing the point in a certain way. You should facilitate it if they are doing it, but of course you cannot expect it. And the same with migrants and refugees, they have enough on their plate as it is, right? And then the spare time, which is so limited, using it up for organizing, that needs some really much dedication. On the other hand, you should at least facilitate and provide space if people are making this big effort, right? In a way, because if you don't have any rooms, like physical space, don't have any financing for travel, it will be even harder. And I mean, that's the way how it's done in Germany. We can debate, but at least Germany is financing some civil society participation in these events, right? Of course, we can talk how are they selected, what is the criteria, but often we have German NGOs who fulfill certain criteria being sponsored to go to these events. I think it's better to do it this way than to do it the other way around. But that we have to keep in mind. It's of course it's a big struggle to self-organize. Then I like your pragmatic view, and I mean that my main focus was like we have this somewhat outdated but still important notion of protection for refugees, and that's something that should not be given up. Ideally, we would have a new, better convention, but it would not be better probably if you do a convention now. So we have to stick with what we have. But I think that's where we should have the separation, right? Keep this mandate, and of course, I never speak of economic migration, because in Germany this term is also kind of discredited, or even worse, they say economic asylum, right? So it's a very negative word. So, but labor migration is a little bit, it's the same thing we're talking about, but labor or work migration has, for the common public and everybody, a more positive spin, right? They're willing to work, right? Work is something good in a way. This is very basic in a way, but I think it's different groups. I mean, there's good articles on how historically in the 1920s by Katie Long, you read it probably, the goal of ILO back then was to make refugees into labor migrants. I found it a very fascinating read, because people were kind of moved to countries and then they try to organize jobs for them. That's kind of a good thing, right? So in Germany, one of my main criticisms is that people are not allowed to work, and then people are complaining they are not working, right? I mean, they are being patronized from the state level, they're losing agency. We talked about this yesterday. They're being put into big, camps is the wrong word, but big facilities away from everybody. Of course, there's trouble if you put people together like this. And as I said, if you put 500 Germans into conditions like this, you would have some trouble too, right? And these are very traumatized, vulnerable people, right? So opening labor markets for refugees is a good idea, but we also still have to accept people coming who will not be able to contribute to our economy, right? So the economic contribution cannot be a criteria if you get a refugees. That's the distinction. On the other hand, for labor migrants, I think it is legitimate to say to make programs that are matching the need for labor in the country. And we have people saying, but then you classify people of the youth, etc. But I think it's no benefit if you're coming and you don't find a job, right? I mean, having a job, being able to work is something foundational to integrate, for self-worth, for everything else, right? So that's why I would say we should distinguish a bit. But on a global level, I would be fully with you that we can say have global compacts on migrants and refugees together. And that's a bit of a criticism on civil society. We have many NGOs being involved in both compacts, like the one I always forget, the volunteer CEV.
Yeah, the voice.
Yeah, quite big one. And I really didn't see many linkages being made. And the irony is a bit, in the Global Compact on Migration, actually there is quite some stuff that can be applied to refugees. So the distinction is not so clear in this compact, right? It's also about undocumented migration, which might be refugee migration. So I'm fully on board with the argument that it could be negotiated together. And then the big buzzword is mixed migration flows we're having, right? I mean, people might be first migrants, then refugees, stranded migrants, all these capacities. So we should need policy resolutions that are fitting for everybody. So think it together, but keep the mandates maybe still different. And of course, one reason why it was negotiated differently is not maybe because it's a better policy, but because we have UN organizations that are related to this topic, right? So every organization has the inherent desire to expand, to keep its mandate, to keep its turf. right? So do you want to say, oh, you can have my compact, you can talk about it? Of course not, that's not how it works, right? You very anxiously defend your own turf, and you're very suspicious of another organization entering your turf, etc. That's how bureaucracies and organizations work in a certain way, right? And that's why I said we are the leading organization for migration. No, we are the leading organization for migration. We have all this turf wars going on. And last point, geopolitics. That's an anecdote I talked to some of you already. So I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia on a global level, become very politicized, migrants as class, global organizing, and then the German Development Corporation invited me to give like a training seminar for German organizations, right? And then I found that they were much more German than me, right? Because they asked, how do we found a foundation? What formula do we have to fill out? Where do we get the funding here? What is the proper procedure, etc.? And I came like a bit like this, right? That was a good learning experience. And of course it makes sense, because the main difference is, I would say most migration to Germany is people who might intend to stay, and migration in Southeast Asia is people who have never the ability to stay. It's called circular migration. It's a very misused, misidentified term. It's a buzzword. If you look the way circular migration works, it's semi-permanent temporary migration.
Yes.
It's like a contradiction, but it's people going 2 years to Hong Kong, 6 weeks back, see their daughter, 2 years to Hong Kong, 10 years. I know people are 20 years in Hong Kong, and it's the same contract. They never get the right to a boat. So naturally, you might become more engaged with the country of destination and origin because you cannot stay there, and you're affected by policies from both countries, right? If you say, this is Germany, I try to make it my home, I want to integrate here, of course, you might still have some diaspora activism, very contested term, but maybe it makes sense to say, this is my life, I'm staying here, I'm putting all my limited energy into doing it the German way, whatever that is, right? But if you're a temporary migrant, you're dependent on state of origin, of destination, on recruitment agencies, very important, the problematic player, the migration industry, all these factors. So I would say that is one difference why we have this comparatively good organizing in Southeast Asia. We have a long tradition of labor organizing in Latin America. We have a long tradition of labor organizing in Europe as well, right? But trade unions for a long time, I don't have to tell you, they were singing the Internationale, but they're not really living it, right? They were very defensive about migrant workers. And the way it is changing a bit in Germany, they lost so many memberships that they're saying, okay, how can we get new members? We get many migrants, so it's a pragmatic term, but it's not for the worst in a way, so they opened up a little bit. But I also see a mismatch between the global unions, of which existence I only learned during the years of this research. Not many people know we have global unions, who are very progressive, and then we come to the country national level, not so progressive anymore sometimes.
Thank you. I saw another hand, please. And so we collected 2 questions, so please, you first and then Elena. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Scholte. I'm at the Charles University. Thanks for interesting contributions. I have 2 questions, one for Stefan, one for Magda. When I follow the case of Germany, I find it quite interesting that there are quite a few grassroots initiatives to engage the migrants, or to give them voice or platform for speaking for themselves, such as Weiterschreiben and similar. So I would be interested to hear your thoughts on how effective they have been, whether they really managed to amplify the voices of those people.
Can you say the name of the example you were giving?
Weiterschreiben.
Weiterschreiben, okay.
It was initiated by, I think, Ines Kappert and Aniko, and I forgot his name. Writing on. I mean, they've been basically engaging writers who came from Syria and other countries. So we're trying to bridge that stereotype that migrants just need to be taken care of, and somebody else has to be speaking on their behalf. So I wanted to hear if there are more things like this, and whether you feel that at least some part of the policy sphere is listening and understands that these people can co-shape decisions. The question for Magda, I always like it when you describe a specific experience of an Eastern or Central or whatever we are, European NGO. But the way I've been watching the situation here since 2015 has been that, I mean, especially given our very low acceptance rates, that the NGOs in countries like Czech Republic or Slovakia, especially the NGOs specifically focusing on refugees, were suddenly in panic because everybody started asking them about their opinion. Everybody started, media, policymakers, etc., started to hear from them, not necessarily then following their advice, that's another thing. And they were incredibly overwhelmed in terms of what is expected of them and what is their capacity to do. So if you can tell us a little bit more about your perspectives when you're encountering Western or Northern NGOs, and if you can compare a little bit more the resources you have with those for your North. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we please collect also a question from Professor Kaufmann? So, and then you also raised the hand.
Oh, is there somebody else behind me?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. Talking about the global, we have a tendency often to talk about, I think, Stefan, you were saying that there are certain regions which are more prominent. And I think it's worth thinking about which ones are trying to drive various debates. But if I think of the UK, it's also quite interesting because there's a difference between migrant rights organisations which are not organised by migrants. Or they were way back in the 1960s, but they've become quite professional NGOs. They're the ones that take the court cases. But we then have, interesting enough, in the trade union sector, it's migrants who've been organising because they weren't heard adequately by the mainstream unions. And they've had some very successful, like the equivalent of the American janitors, so the industrial cleaners. So it's really quite interesting here, the relationship between what I would call migrant rights organisations, which are can be well organised, and then organisations representing migrants, and they're not the same. And I don't know again whether they would have been represented in something like Marrakesh. So I think it's interesting to do a bit of a geography and the sociology, you can say.
Thanks. So you can react.
There was one more question, or should we?
Sorry,
If you don't mind, sorry.
It was just about your comment that it would be like interesting or better probably when there would be more European NGOs. But I was wondering if it's necessary that Europeans have a bigger impact, because since they are just 1% of all refugees in the European Union, would it be so necessary that the Western world has a bigger impact on all these questions?
So.
Okay. Well, of course, the situation of our situation and the situation of many organizations in Northern Western Europe is very different in terms of financing and as well in terms of strategies and I would say procedures that are already within the organization. So yeah, we were surprised in 2015, definitely. Until now, one of my wishes, or biggest wish, was, I hope the migration will become a political issue. So the politicians will talk about it. That's not only the Minister of Interior who is deciding everything and the political parties are silent. Well then, this is the story that you should be very careful what you wish. It happened, and the result I wasn't that happy as well. I'm still not that happy about the change. In the Czech Republic, what happened was there were very few people coming, but the pressure and discussion and the focus that we were facing as civil society organizations working with migrants was very intense, and we were not prepared. And I think that we are still not prepared. If this repeats, we are definitely much used to it. But I don't feel that I have more capacity to focus on advocacy and use this attention towards the way how I would like to shift it to get more rights. And we learned a lot. We learned a lot as well from organization from North. For me, the experience of being a member of board of PICUM, it's a learning experience. I meet people who have been there for 20 years. And I meet other organizations, and I can see to very inside processes of the big network. So a lot of things can be used then here. But I think that we are all kind of understand that we will never have that money and and maybe as well respect from the society in the Czech Republic compared to organizations in Sweden or UK as well. And so I know the situation is changing as well. But the impact that I think is the worst after 2015 is this hate that's now actually going towards migrants as well, but as well the civil society. That we are not viewed as a credible partner or even a credible part of the society. That we shouldn't be part of the society, and we are not representing the interests of the societies. And this is what I think the worst thing that's marginalizing our role here. And but I don't really see the answer and how to deal with the situation even from West-North countries, because they don't experience it, or if they do, they don't know what to do with that as well. So.
Thanks for all the questions. The first one was on Germany. I mean, the very simplified common narrative is when the summer of migration started, all the Germans forgot to be German. They were very nice and friendly and open for 3 months, and then it stopped all again, and now everybody's voting right-wing, and this is all done, right? That's the way it is pretended, the end of welcome culture, etc. But of course, the truth is many of the initiatives are still ongoing on the ground. There are very respectable efforts of migrant integrating, of refugee integration, of training, vocational training, labor market training for refugees. But these are not the people who go to the streets and are screaming against refugees, obviously, right? So I'm not downplaying the really problematic right-wing votes we have in Germany, but maybe it's a misrepresentation in a way that I would say we still have a majority who have the tendency to be sort of open and welcoming, and we still have many, many grassroots initiatives where something is working. And it's not only civil society, it's also the German community bureaucracy, right? Being bureaucratic, but it's been quite impressive what has been done actually with a significant number of people coming in a short time. So they were like, okay, let's make a plan. Where do we put them? How do we, right? Very technocratic, but maybe not a bad response. And also an important partner often forgotten is small and medium enterprises, because they are looking desperately to have workforce, because we have an aging population in Germany. So they are all about, can we please train this refugee? Can he please stay here? He's doing well. So it's a good partner also for civil society on the ground level without any protection or charity, right? It's something he can contribute, she can contribute. Of course, she should be able to stay here in any case. But so a lot is happening. This particular initiative, I do not know. Of course, quite a few people started out helping, and as it is with voluntary work, many stopped again, right? Either because to do something else, or sometimes, and that's a bit cynical, don't take me up on it, there was also a mismatch, right? But organizing a yoga course for refugees is a nice idea, but maybe that's not what they wanted to do in this particular moment, right? Fair enough. Maybe at some other point in their life, right? So that's the question: is what you offer, is it more dependent on what you would like to do, or is it oriented? And that's a problem we have quite often, right? You don't want to be patronizing. Yeah, but you should do this and that. Maybe they have a very materialistic outlook, which you say, oh, but you should do this and that. But if you flee your country, if you have your bare existence at hand, maybe you don't have luxury to look at other things like this, right? I'm not ridiculing these initiatives, very important, but maybe that's why some people had the wrong expectations. How they could help and contribute, fair enough. They did not continue doing this, but I would say on the ground it's still working quite well. And actually for employment and economic contribution, of course not everybody's an architect coming or whatever, but I mean there is a positive outcome, I would say, in many labor market needs. It would be better if we would open the labor market more freely to refugees. But then the next debate is, should we have a segregated labor market for refugees? And that's something I see very problematic, right? Because then we have the discourse, are they taking away our jobs, they get the €1 jobs, etc. So they should be, in principle, be paid the same as Germans in this regard. And the second point I found very fascinating about the geographies, and it shows that we have to look at the tradition and history of every country and how it affects organizing. It would be very interesting to make a typology. Obviously in the UK, if I interpreted it right, we have a longer tradition of migration, Commonwealth, people coming in the 60s, so much more well established in a way, becoming professionalized. But then we have the phenomenon that the first, second, third generation don't necessarily are so fond of each other, right? I mean, we have long-term migrants in Germany. You find a taxi driver saying, I don't like all these refugees coming, right? Because naturally they are established, they see them as competition on the labor market, or they're saying, I made it my own way, some self-glorification maybe, and they are getting all this support, etc. So the most right-wing votes, unfortunately, we get in the Russlanddeutsche, I must say, right? What's the English, the Vertriebene, so kind of the, I don't know the English term, right? We had German minorities and many.
Expelled?
No, kind of like Donauschwaben, so like they identified as Germans, and when the Cold War ended, everybody was guaranteed to come to Germany in a way, right? And when I started coming to Freiburg in the 90s, this was seen as a very problematic group. They have gangs and criminals.
Returning migrants or migrant community.
No, not really. It's a really specific, and they have to say, like, my grandmother was 2% German in a way, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. So now I'm living in an area with a high percentage, but they have a very high tendency to vote for right-wing parties. Repatriates, exactly, right? Of course, and then here we can say they get still Russian TV, what's the name?
Russia Today.
Russia Today, exactly, that's the main source of information.
The German ethnics.
Exactly, the ethnic Germans come from Russia, right?
They're probably more German than anybody else.
Yeah, and they've never been a political force. All of a sudden, 4,000 near Freiburg go to the streets. What happened? Russia Today made a fake story about a refugee raping a 14-year-old. That's the only source. Then they go to the streets. Refugees go home in a way, right? So that's a very problematic. So the cynical way would say they are so integrated now, they're as racist or more as other Germans in a way, right? But then, I mean, that's something you can find in many countries, that there is competition between different levels of immigrants. And the last part, of course, I mean, I was talking specifically about Eastern Europe, because I think it's underrepresented. And of course, we cannot only go by the countries of origin, because the political solutions or policies that affect them are being done in the country of destination, right? So we should have them on board, and maybe have NGOs providing a counter narrative, right? To say not everybody has the same outlook like Mr. Orban or others, right? So that's why I would say it would be an important contribution to have them also on board, but of course, not being a dominant force, but have an equal. But on the other hand, it's non-binding what is being agreed upon there, right? It's only deliberations, so the more the merrier in this way, I would say, right? Not everybody has the same vote or something like this.